Item number 3, Robin, would you come on up? We have the operation budget for 15-16, action item, second reading.
So this is the second reading of the operational budget for this coming fiscal year, and what I've put together is a slideshow that I hope, in addition to the item, answers some of the questions that we had as we read through the first reading of this budget. And so if we can go through that slide deck, and then I would take questions from the
Sure, that'd be great.
the board, if that would.
So we'll go through the deck
Please.
and then we'll take questions.
Yeah,
Terrific.
would that
That's
work for
perfect,
people?
yeah.
So I'll see if I can address some of the questions that remained at the end of the first reading through this deck. So the first slide is a high-level summary of the overall adjustments to the budget, and this includes all three of our funds, so the Teachers' Retirement Fund, the Teachers' Deferred Compensation Fund, and the Teachers' Health Benefit Fund. It also includes items in the Teachers' Retirement Fund that are continuously appropriated, so that would be your corporate governance, staff, their benefits, and other operating expenses and equipment. And this really shows how we get from the budget in 14-15 to the budget in 15-16 at that macro level view. So the first couple of lines after starting with this year's budget are really to adjust for items that were included on a one-time basis in 14-15. And then we add in things that you approved last year for funding in this fiscal year, those particularly being the Pension Solution Project budget, which was a multi-year budget, as well as the operating expenses for the Inland Empire Member Service Center. And then this next line, the operational increases, was the area where we were not complete in our addressing of your questions in terms of what those included. So I have some deeper details on that in the next couple of slides. And then the next line are the actual budget change proposal requests that we are putting forward for this year. And then, again, the summary of the total operational budget for 15-16. In terms of the line item comparison, this is a different view, really, of the same information, and it was in response to a question from one of the board members, just to give you a feel as to where the money sits in terms of those major levels of expense, salary, benefits, and operating expenses and equipment. So you can see the distribution there. Obviously, the OE&E numbers are very large, and most of that is due to the pension solution numbers. So those are big components of that particular line item. So again, just a different view of the budget with the same results from a footing perspective. And then again, you can see the differential from year to year. In terms of the actual administrative adjustments, we have made changes between what we presented in the first reading and what we've got now. Although there are quite a few moving parts, and I hesitate to get into all of them, what I do want to share with you is that we had a mistake in our base. We had double counted certain positions that appeared in source of data that we get through the State Controller's Office, and then our own adjustments that we do on top of that. We hadn't recognized they were in the base, and so we had double counted 40 positions. So it wasn't in the actual, so we calculated adjustments on that errant base. So you can see that some of the adjustments have decreases on the salary side. Now, the benefit number actually ended up going up because we also got adjustments to increase the retirement rate, so that offsets that correction. So like I said, there are lots of moving parts, but we did find an error in the base on which we had calculated the salary adjustments and the benefit adjustments as we presented them in September, and then we have updated the rates to reflect the new retirement rates that we received. Again, showing those adjustments, you can see in terms of the salary adjustment and the benefit adjustment. Again, the adjustments overall on the benefit side show a decrease, but the base has changed. So again, the rate has gone up, but the base on which that was calculated has been reduced. And you can see that too in the MSA, the 2.5%, and then a recognition that we didn't need any increase for incentives.
Robin, do you mind just caught my attention on the prior slide?
Sure.
The pro rata delta, can you, not that
So
slide.
I skipped it. Oh, so I'm going the wrong way. Sorry about that.
The one right there. What's
Yeah.
the pro rata one there,
So
please?
those are those are changes that come through from our service providers in central government.
Right.
And what we recognized as we reassessed numbers is that we had, although there are increases, we have adequate reserves to cover those. So we don't need to adjust it. So in other words, we had calculated an adjustment based on the change in the rates, but when we went back and looked at our prior funding levels and adjustments that have occurred over a number of years, we acknowledged that we didn't need to increase the budget for those increases in rates, that we had adequate reserves to do that.
I see. Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay? Then this slide really presents the summary of the proposals for change in 15-16. You don't see the pension solution here because, again, that was approved last year with all of the annual adjustments. So you see the final member service center, investment portfolio, complexity adjustments, technology infrastructure and licenses, and the enterprise information management program. And I do have a slide on each one of those budget change proposals. So the member service center, BCP this time is a little bit more complicated than it's been in the past in that it recognizes some increase in utilities costs that are additive factors in base rents that we had not incorporated in the original BCPs for each of the centers in Glendale and Santa Clara, to a lesser degree in Irvine, and to a very limited degree in the Inland Empire. So what we've done is we've projected the lease increases through the tenor of the lease, and so we've incorporated those increases in this request. We have also recognized that with the number of member service centers we have now, that we have a need within the facilities area for a staff person who's dedicated to making sure that those facilities are maintained and that the safety of our employees are ensured on an ongoing basis. So it's to support those functions as we have the build out of these additional operating areas to make sure that we are in fact getting the services that we deserve from the landlords and property managers, and also that we are able to service our members and our staff, ensuring their safety and adequate working environments. So it does include more than just the MSC. And in this particular case, you'll see again the operating request for 16-17 when that member service center will be up and running, and the staffing that's required for that on an ongoing basis. So many of these costs are one time, but you do see the component in there for the ongoing operation expense. The next one really supports the increased internal management of the investment portfolio, as well as the recognition of the complexity of the portfolio, the fact that we are looking at many more different strategies. It does also facilitate the increased transactional volume and also the focus on risk mitigation, addressing the volatility and comparabilities across the asset classes. So it's additional staff to support that. The technology infrastructure and license has two separate components. The larger component is related to the technology in this building and recognizes the fact that we had not, as we installed technology in this building, it has worked for us, but we also need to build up a capital reserve to be able to replace it on an ongoing basis. So what we tried to do was anticipate those replacements over the course of the next 5 years and determine an annual amount that we would need to be able to keep our technology current as it changes rapidly. One of the examples of that is all of our video equipment that we're using now, and the fact that that was deployed in 2009 and is not necessarily as advanced as it needs to be for all the things we want to do. In addition, there are ongoing license fees. There is an adjustment for SAP in that our original BCP did not provide adequate funding for both the maintenance and operations and the ongoing licensing support. There are also software license ongoing fees for our Clarity and JAMA tools, which are used respectively for portfolio management and requirements management and are critical to the success of the pension solution project.
Before she goes on, could I?
Hold on a second.
Sorry, I didn't mean
okay.
to be
It's okay.
blazing
Go
through
ahead,
without.
You just hit where I had a question. So
Sure.
in the write-up, you were talking about licensing and periodic refresh. And definitely some of this money is going to software licensing and technical support for things that we don't have yet. But
Correct. So
we'll be procuring. how much of this is actually things that we already had that we let, is anything in here, things that we let slip by? How can we better prepare for the annual licensing fees and those types of things?
So let me clarify my body language on that. So the Clarity and JAMA and SAP products, the big software licensing
yeah.
requests are things that are installed here. So we had funded them under our technology appropriation as the project, but we need ongoing operational budget to support the licenses. For SAP, we did not include adequate resources in the
Okay.
BCP that we put forward. So that
So
was.
basically, a lot of the licensing and thing is new licensing, not.
Well, it's ongoing licensing. We have to pay licenses every year. So we buy a piece of software, we install it, we pay for it, but then there's a multiplier factor on that cost every year. So this is the budgetary reserves for that. And the software is about $1.5 million or $1.6 million
Okay.
of the number. And the technology infrastructure request is about $2.2 million. Now,
So the licensing is a very small part.
well, no, I mean, it's, a third,
Okay.
40%. The technology infrastructure, to answer your question, we do have the capability to do like PC refreshes. So our personal computer workstations, we're
right.
talking about more of the underlying network infrastructure, the
Okay.
video infrastructure. So those things that you think of on an enterprise basis that will cost significant
Okay.
resources. And what we're trying to do is to have an adequate operational budget, not necessarily to spend that every year, but to accumulate it in a way that we can, in fact, do a refresh and move forward.
Alrighty. And
So we might
okay.
write a multi-year contract to do something.
Okay, so these aren't like old licenses that we've been renewing year after year after year.
No, so Clarity.
That's
and-
what I was more worried
Yeah,
about
Clarity
than-
and JAMA are new products that we've just installed. Like I
Got
said,
it.
SAP, we did have a BCP for, we just didn't have enough money in it to
All right.
support both the M&O and the,
Thanks, Robin.
okay?
Yep.
Any other?
Continue.
So the enterprise information management is a similar budget change proposal request in that this is a project that was originally funded out of our technology appropriation for projects. And as a result of the projects, we need to establish an ongoing program to make sure that we have adequate governance over information. As you can imagine and have read about, information has become so critical to the running of business, and we have lots of it. So this is really to make a permanent component for that management of data, establishing governance rules around it, how it gets updated, what kind of review occurs as it's updated, and how we incorporate it into various technology and research efforts. So that's what this one's about. And then in terms of the Teachers Deferred Compensation Fund, this is an area where we have asked the board to consider allowing for perhaps increased revenue over the course of the budget year, so that to the extent that there are additional revenues coming into this particular program, that there is the authority to spend that money as long as the cash is available. So this really talks about the fact that in addition to the underlying budget request and the adjustments for salary and benefits, there's also a request here for that authority to spend 5% above that baseline budget, should there be revenues. Now, we're actually anticipating that that may not occur, but because we've changed vendors, there's some uncertainty, and we would still like that authority if that's to the board's pleasure. And then this really summarizes the adjustments that we're asking for the ongoing operation of the San Diego Member Service Center in terms of the 7 staff that will be permanent staff. Typically, we open these member service centers at the end of the budget year, so June 2016. So we have not incurred staffing or operating costs in the year that the center is built out, but we anticipate the staff loading that will be necessary to run those in the following year. So this is the budget year +1.
Thank you, Robin.
Paul? So I'm looking at the page 2 of your report. So what is the $12,745,000 of proposed operational increases?
So those are the salary and benefit changes. So if
Salary and benefit changes for the current.
the current staff.
Current staff and current level of services.
Correct.
This is just 1 year to the next increased cost for current staff and current level of services.
Correct. So we have a, component of that in terms of the salary section, we have a component of that looks at merit increases, a component of that looks at the 2.5% bargaining increases and the associated increases for management. So it's a combination of components. There are also increases in there for the statutory change, salary changes that you have approved. So we're trying to make all of the anticipated adjustments to salary that have been approved on that basic staffing levels that we have within the organization. And it does include corporate governance and the staff associated with deferred comp and health benefits.
So, Gary was probably doing a different calculation. My calculation was, so relative to the 14-15 budget, this is about a 7.8% increase. Is that kind of in line with what we've experienced in the past?
Let's see, I did the same calculations. Let me make sure I've got it. There, let's see. There are 2.5% increases for the salaries on collective bargaining units. There's a 7.5% increase on CEAs. There's a statutory appointment average of about 8. For our temp help, it's about 7.5. So it is in those ranges. It is higher than it's been in the past because we've been in the furlough situation and we haven't been seeing those kinds of bargained increases in addition to the merit salary increases. So I will tell you, it is a bigger number.
Yeah.
It is a bigger number.
Okay.
And it's also for staff that are involved in, we have calculated an increase for staff who have been involved or are here on what I'll call a project basis, because we want to make sure that those raises are also incorporated. So even though you see the 1,000 permanent staff, we also have planned for staff loading for the pension solution that is fairly significant, and then we'll see a ramp down.
Yeah, I was just, because it's 0 FTEs, so it's
Right.
$12,745,000 of additional budgetary expenditures, but it doesn't bring any additional FTEs.
No, it
to,
really is just the
to
change in the
address
cost.
Okay,
Right, so it's merit, as people
Right,
climb the
right,
steps. It's
right.
also the broad-based increases that have been bargained and the similar increases for management to go along with that.
okay.
And it also includes, I'm sorry, Paul, it
No, that's fine.
also includes the no longer furloughs,
Yeah, that actually
is that part of it?
That came out in 14, 15, and that was
Right.
actually in our budget. That was
Okay.
a savings. So
Okay.
these are really add-ons.
All right.
Brian, did I miss anything or? Right, so it's for that base of people. So, right. Yes,
What about the additional contributions on, for PERS, is that included
that's
in
in the
this?
benefits number.
Okay, so, okay.
That's in the benefits number. And the reason that number is so big this year is because the rate change, we're applying to catch up both 14, 15 and 15, 16. So it's like we're including 2 years because we didn't have a rate change in our budget for this year. So we're catching up for 2 years in this budget.
Any other questions? Anyone else before I jump in? I have a couple, but I'd like to hear, no? Okay. Around the issue of healthcare cost increases, have they, there was a period where those rate increases were really accelerating at an unsustainable level. I heard some presentations recently where the healthcare costs have kind of stabilized a little bit. They're not rising as quickly as they had been in the past. Is that
Yeah, so
our
you can
experience?
see that here. We do have an OASDI increase that's fairly substantial, but the The biggest change is in the retirement. That's really where the, you know,
Okay. And secondly, the 10 FTEs for, and 2.7 million budgeted for the investment staff to bring
Right.
investments and bring them in-house, manage those assets in-house. What type of savings will the investment division see in terms of managing those assets in-house, in terms of reduced fees, et cetera, if any?
So, you know, in terms of my recollection, and Chris, I'll look to you if you want to, you know, we're talking about 10 to 1. I mean, the savings are huge in comparison to the costs of the internal management. So the multiplier effect is significant in terms of the savings on external management fees. So although it looks like an add from the budget perspective, because the external managers are continuously appropriated, this is really a savings item as you transfer funding.
Sure.
So
What you said.
Right. Yeah, I'd love maybe for next year, or at some point, maybe it's a request for information. As time goes by, we can actually calculate what those savings were. What is the dollar amounts of assets that were brought in-house and are now being managed by these new 10 FTEs at a cost of 2.7 million to the system? But, so what are the total assets that are being brought in-house? And what we were paying in fees when they were managed externally, and how the performance is for those assets that are now being managed in-house versus how they would have been what the performance would have been out.
Yeah, that's a tougher measure because we're in some cases we are pulling money away from another manager, so we still have the returns of that and can compare. In a lot of cases, it'll be against benchmarks, so we can show you that. But we won't necessarily know how a BlackRock or a State Street would have done against that benchmark because they may not have a competing product. But we'll let you know. You do get, just to make sure you all know, you do get the rating of our internal management in your semi-annual performance report, the color-coded one that shows you how they're doing relative to their peer groups in that specific style. And then we can certainly track the savings and the cost, because obviously there's two sides. There's the cost savings, but also you want to know that we're getting an equal or better return than we would have been from the outside manager.
Because the history of this item was, as we talked about it and fleshed it out, was we believed that we could generate comparable
Yep.
rates of return at a lower cost to the system, so why not bring those assets in-house?
Exactly.
So-
You don't do it just because it saves money.
Right.
If it costs you money by not getting the return, then it's not worth it.
Right,
It's
exactly.
got to be a dual benefit.
Yeah, perfect.
The
So-
cost-benefit analysis
yeah.
that may become federal law.
Okay, thanks, Chris. One other question around the customer, our service centers?
Service centers, yeah.
Right, so what's the process for evaluating the number of employees that are, because they're projections as we're opening these up, as the year goes on, how do you do an analysis as to whether or not you have appropriate staffing and what types of changes will be necessary going forward?
Right, so again, we're in a long-term evaluation of the shifts in the program, so it's not just a one-for-one exchange, and I'll look to Peggy or Andrew if they've got things to compliment me on, but the program has really shifted, so we're looking at penetration rates, we're looking at feedback in terms of satisfaction, as well as looking at the adequacy of the staffing. So, you know, I think that the model is also shifting. So looking at what it was before and what it is now is going to be tough, because what we're trying to accomplish is not only the penetration with the membership, but also delivering a different kind of service across a broader base and the effectiveness of that retirement counseling at various stages in the member's life. So we do look at those metrics in terms of the counts and the people that are taking advantage of those services in each area. But I will tell you, we've not yet seen the maturation from the metrics perspective where we can draw a complete conclusion, because we're in that transition of the programs.
If I might add that we are also attempting to shift as many members as are comfortable to our group counseling program, because it's more cost-effective for us. So that makes more efficient use of our resources, and we're able to service more members. They still get individualized estimates, and they still have an individualized appointment with their counselor, but it's not as long. And so we're able to see more members through that media. We're continuing to look at, are there alternate ways for us to deliver counseling and member education services, utilizing technology differently, and doing things that don't require our staff to spend travel time, because that eats up valuable time spent directly servicing members. Robin's correct that we are not yet mature in our distribution of members who receive one-on-one counseling and members who receive group counseling. Surprisingly enough, we're finding that the members who receive group counseling rate satisfaction with the service higher than those who had individual service, which is contrary to what members expect going in.
Right.
And they find that's the case because others in their group ask
Ask
questions
questions.
that they didn't think of, but they're thinking, yeah, I should know that too. So,
Yeah.
so there's a real element of discovery
Right.
incorporated into that. Certainly, it is a service-driven business enterprise component. And so to the extent that we're unable to achieve the demand for service in any given geographic area through the member service centers, we would look first to the redistribution of existing resources and then come back for additional resources to augment the client demand.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. I don't see any other questions or comments from the committee. This is an action item, so I would entertain a motion to approve and to adopt the 2015-16 operating budget here in its second reading.
So moved.
Moved by Paul.
Second.
Seconded by Grant. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you, Robin. Thank you. Item number 4 on our agenda is the state and federal legislation and regulations. Mary Ann Ashley. Hi, Mary Ann, welcome. I'm going to ask, the vice chair stepped out, and I have to step out for a moment as well. If we could continue, I'll just ask Dana to, I'll be right back. Dana.
I got you, Mary Ann.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. There are 4 proposals to present to you today for your consideration and action. There's 1 regulatory proposal and 3 legislative proposals. I'd like to begin, please, with the regulatory proposal, and it is to make modifications to the penalties and interest regulations. Staff is recommending that we make 3 modifications or changes to the penalties and interest regulations, 2 of which are very minor and technical in nature. 1 change is to correct typographical errors that occur in the cash balance benefit program section. In the regulations, there are 2 sections that were to have similar language. 1 section that would be specific to the defined benefit program and another section that would be specific to the cash balance benefit program. However, language that's specific to the DB program has been incorrectly put into the cash balance section. So we'd like to correct that error so that the cash balance section refers to the cash balance participants. Another change is that there are 2 documents that are incorporated by reference in the regulations that have since been revised since the regulations first became effective. So we would like to update those references so that they are referring to the most up-to-date documents that are incorporated by reference. And lastly, the current penalty rate of 5% for very late contributions reporting is no longer sufficient to replace the lost state contributions. With the passage of CalSTRS funding bill, the state contribution rate has been increased beginning in July 2014, and it's scheduled to be incrementally increased to reach about 8.8% by 2016-17. So we're proposing that the regulations be updated so that we can adjust the penalty rate for very late contributions and reporting to actually match the state contribution rate in order to fully recoup the lost state contributions. So as the state contribution rate changes, so with the penalty rate. We haven't identified any costs with moving forward with these changes. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
So we promulgate regulations outside of the legislative process. but then if we want to make changes to that regulation, we have to go through a legislative process?
It depends. Documents that are incorporated by reference, anytime you change them, you do have to go through the regulatory process again. So you can either include a copy of the documents, or you can list each component of the document. And these two particular documents that are referenced are extremely long, so we reference them by date. They've been updated, so we have to update the regulations, and we do have to go through the regulatory process.
Yeah, this is not a proposed bill, this is a proposed regulatory change.
Thank you.
Anything else, Dan?
Nope, that's it.
Any other questions, comments? This too is an action item,
Yes.
so I would entertain a motion to approve the recommendation. Grant, did you want to weigh in?
So we're taking these one by one, right?
We can, or we can wait till Marianne goes through.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah,
Chair.
why don't we just do one by one?
Then I will move the proposal to go ahead with the rulemaking as proposed in the.
Thank you, Grant. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dana. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Marianne, continue. Thank you.
So for the legislative proposals, the first one is to expand board authority over the chief operating officer and chief financial officer positions. Staff is again recommending that the board sponsor legislation to expand the board's authority over these positions. Last year, the board sponsored AB 125, which would have granted the board this authority. The measure did make it through both houses. However, it was not ultimately forwarded to the governor, as efforts were focused on obtaining a plan to address CalSTRS funding needs. But the need for board authority over these positions still exists. The financial investment transactions continue to grow in complexity. They are more complicated, with more complicated regulatory requirements associated with them, and there's more risk management involved. Additionally, with the implementation of the funding plan, the overhaul of CalSTRS financial reporting and pension systems, and the new GASB financial reporting requirements, there comes even more risk and complexities. Currently, because both the COO and CFO position are at the career executive assignment level, recruitment for these positions is limited to the state civil service pool. And with that limitation, CalSTRS is severely constrained with its abilities to recruit and retain the most highly candidates with very specialized skill sets that are likely to be found outside the state civil service pool, and it would be found from other pension funds or large private sector financial institutions. We are very fortunate that both incumbents currently are very highly qualified and competent. However, both are vulnerable either to nearing retirement or actually being recruited by other financial institutions. There are other state agencies that have been granted the authority to set compensation and establish classes of positions in order to meet the needs of their agency. The State Compensation Insurance Fund and the California Health Benefit Exchange both have authority over the COO and CFO positions, and 2 years ago, CalSTRS was granted authority over the CFO position. So staff is recommending that the board sponsor this legislation to expand the board's authority over these two positions in order to provide CalSTRS the ability to more competitively recruit from a highly and larger candidate pool, as well as to proactively plan for succession. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee, comments? Irena?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to alert the board that I will abstain from this and the other two legislative proposals. While I understand my role here versus my role at Department of Finance, other people may not, and so I don't want to have a position, I have voted on a bill, and then that is confusing to people on the outside about why Department of Finance may take a different view of the bill. So I will just abstain, and there won't be any of those
Thank
kinds
you
of
for that
questions.
clarification. Appreciate it. I do, does anyone else have a question or comment? Seeing none, I do have a question. Should we be successful in achieving this legislative initiative and have the authority over these salaries still would be capped relative to their pensions in terms of the reforms, in terms of what the maximum allowable salary would be? You're looking at me like I'm.
But it would still, the salaries themselves would be subject to the IRS limits, the base salaries. In this case, these employees are currently under that IRS limit, so there'd be still some impact at the base level, but the incentives would not be in any way related to the pension. They would be like the investment staff and not non-considered relative to the defined benefit plan.
Okay.
But they're subject to the same IRS caps that the investment staff are on the base salary side.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Any other questions or comments? Are we looking for action here, Marion? Yes, okay, so we'd entertain a motion.
Move approval to go ahead and sponsor legislation to give the board authority over the COO and CFO positions.
Second.
Moved by Grant and seconded by Dana. Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you, Pat. Thank you.
The next one is on membership issues cleanup. There are 3 issues that we'd like to address in this proposal. First, CalSTRS has identified some individuals that have been reported to CalSTRS even though they've not been performing creditable service as it's defined in the Education Code. And secondly, constituent groups have voiced concern that the definition of credible service is not clear, and that is part of the reason for employer misreporting. And third, current law is not clear on how positions in which employees perform both creditable activities as well as activities that don't meet the definition of credible activities are to be credited to CalSTRS or to another retirement system. CalSTRS has identified that there are individuals who employers have reported to CalSTRS even though the individuals haven't been performing creditable service. And the employers have expressed that that's due in part because they find credential requirements are also somewhat confusing. And as I mentioned, the activities listed in the definition of creditable service are a little bit confusing and vague as well. In order to address these concerns, CalSTRS has been educating employers, and they've also published information via an employer information circular. And additionally, staff has worked very diligently with many stakeholders who have contributed to and are in support of the recommendations included in this ledge proposal. And so what we are recommending is that CalSTRS seek legislation that would allow the service of individuals who have never performed creditable service to be creditable to the defined benefit program under certain criteria for a given period of time. And while there is no way to fully identify the entire population, we do estimate that it would impact between 100 and 1,000 individuals. Additionally, we'd like to clarify and align the definition of creditable service in the teacher's retirement law with the definition in other sections of the Education Code, and broaden the definition of credible service to include certain positions to be reported to and accepted by the system. And finally, we would like to codify how to determine if a full-time position is creditable to CalSTRS if only a percentage of time is spent performing creditable service. And we're proposing that if a person is performing creditable service for more than 50% of the time, that the entire position could be reported to CalSTRS. There would be a de minimis program cost to this and a small work effort and IT costs of less than $100,000. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
We have a member of the public that's at the mic, but just as a process, I'll hear from my fellow colleagues on the committee first, and then we'll take your comment after each one gets to speak. Dana?
So I think you actually answered one of my original questions was the reorganizing of the definition of credible service. But you said that we're looking at expanding the types of activities that would then be allowed as creditable service. When would we see those types of activities? I don't think any of the write-up actually had what those were.
You mean, when would they become effective, or are you asking?
What type of activities
So
would qualify?
It would be activities, for example, that are connected with the enforcement of laws related to compulsory education, coordination of child welfare services between the home and school, certain HR activities, outgrowth activities when they're performed in conjunction with creditable service activities as currently defined. So those are some examples of broadening the definition of creditable service.
So one of them you're talking about home to health?
Child
child
welfare, coordination of child welfare activities between home and school.
Which could be someone that's employed by a county and working for the county that doesn't really have anything to do with the school, so it's like a non-school employee? I'm just,
Yeah, let me try to clarify. First of all, it only applies to people who work for a school district or a county office.
Okay.
Because the definition of employer doesn't change. And what we're
Okay.
trying to do with this proposal is to align those activities that require a credential with those activities that are creditable. The activities that she described require credential, but they're not currently considered creditable to CalSTRS. And the difficulty has been that they would be CalPERS members, but from CalPERS perspective, their view is, well, if it requires a credential, she should be in CalSTRS, and so
okay,
that's the
because
problem.
I went from somebody that worked for a county welfare department that is coordinating things with a school district with non-credentialed. Okay, thank you, Ed.
Sharon?
I appreciate the question, Dana, because it's a little confusing to me too. So is it kind of how we would almost make the distinction between someone who's certificated versus classified? Is that kind of what you're talking about? Okay. And I guess it's not really, is it delineated in the bill somewhere where that distinction's made? Or I guess I just don't see the language that.
We're still working on the language.
Okay.
But the
So it's
language
just-
would identify the specific activities.
Okay.
Yes.
Sharon?
Okay.
Dana?
Have you thought about, we do have credentialed employees within the state that actually voluntarily take classified positions, say like for a school district that is unwilling to pay a credentialed librarian, that person might choose to become a classified employee, although they're credentialed, just so they can stay in the library. Have we thought, and so there's some fluidity between those types of members that might flow back and forth between actually a credentialed teaching job and being in a library. Have we thought about expanding it in that manner? For those persons that have credentials, that have the potential to be in CalSTRS in another position?
A non-credentialed?
No, they're credentialed, but they're in a non-traditional credentialed job classification. So for a lot of elementary schools, they have library techs. They're a classified position. But there are many credentialed librarians that can't get hired by an elementary school district, so they actually choose to be a classified person in the district. They're members of PERS that way. But there's some fluidity between,
Were they a CalSTRS member previously?
that's a possibility.
Then they.
Or they might want to become a CalSTRS member, but then you get the choice, correct? Of remaining with,
If you're a CalSTRS member, you can elect to stay in CalSTRS.
right,
If you weren't a CalSTRS member, the proposal it only applies to those people who are performing activities that the law requires be credentialed. Even if they themselves have a credential,
Okay.
if they're doing a
Just that the law
non-credential,
for them.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, that's it.
Michelle?
I don't have a question per se, and I was definitely waiting to hear the conversation of the language today. There's no motion on the table yet, but I will need to abstain from this as I talked through with our personnel office. I know we have a lot of credentialed employees who are PERS members now. And, you know, we also, when we have to go in and take over schools, we have some STRS issues there. And I'd like to talk through with our personnel folks before we take a formal position as, you know, in our position here on the board.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Okay, seeing none, member from the public?
This is Michelle Underwood. I'm the legislative advocate for ACA, the Association of California Community College Administrators. And we want to thank first and foremost the CalSTRS staff who has been very engaging to deal with this issue. As you can imagine, there are a number of administrators who are very concerned about their status in CalSTRS and very much want to stay in the CalSTRS system. We have been working very collaboratively, and again, thank the STRS staff for that. We definitely appreciate the approach of allowing folks to stay in CalSTRS who want to stay in CalSTRS, and to proactively take the approach to make sure that the law is as clear as it can be, so we sort of avoid the situation going forward. That being said, there are still a couple of issues that need to be resolved before legislation gets to the governor's desk, especially specifically around the grandfathering, and we understand that there would be there would probably need to be a provision to allow people to opt out from the grandfathering. The issues around who would pay if a person did decide to leave CalSTRS. All the folks we hear from very much want to stay in CalSTRS, but sort of what that process would look like, and whether the employee would have the full information to make that decision, and the full consequences of that. We'd want to make sure that that was clear, as well as some of the issues around creditable service and making sure that those really tie to the CTC regulations, as well as for community colleges, that they really reflect the work being done by community college administrators. And then finally, around the partial, the people who are doing partial service, partial creditable service, that's really not been reflected in the way job duties look in K-12 and community college districts. We don't track it as well as this rule, it looks like, would probably want the duties that specific people are doing. So those would be some issues, again, that we'll need to work out through the process. But again, very appreciative of the approach, and would appreciate your support in sponsoring this legislation.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. Thank you. Hi, Jennifer.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Baker with the California Teachers Association. I really wanted to extend our thanks and appreciation to CalSTRS staff. They've done an absolute tremendous job having a multitude of conversations with various stakeholders on this issue, and we certainly appreciate their outreach and trying to find out how things work at the local level. And what's been very evident is, unfortunately, we've had many years where management wasn't doing their job correctly, and they weren't looking at the rules. And ultimately, at the end of the day, CalSTRS, in their usual wonderful way, is working to try to rectify the situation that will work for all parties. So we really appreciate CalSTRS working to try to ensure that people are following the rules. If we could get folks to follow the CalSTRS one and done model, that would be great. So maybe this could be the one and done approach to fix everything initially. The only concern that we wanted to at least express today, because we haven't taken a formal position, but we are concerned somewhat that 50% might be a little bit low as far as ensuring that someone's in CalSTRS. So perhaps we might want to look at having that increased a little to ensure that someone is truly a CalSTRS employee, and that people might not be using it in an inappropriate way. But we look forward to having long-term discussions and look forward to seeing where this is going to go.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for all that you do. Dana?
So the comments that Michelle made bring me to El Dorado County and the issues that were happening in and out of that county Office of Education. And Ed, I know you know what I'm talking about. This doesn't change that situation at all, correct? Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Ed.
I appreciate hearing that.
We really appreciate that.
I appreciate hearing that.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
so it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we have one abstention on this, and then I didn't call for an two, I'm sorry, and then we had an abstention on the previous vote as well from Irena. Thank you very much. So before, I don't know if this would be an information, what's that? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Go ahead, Mary Ann. Thanks.
And the last legislative proposal has to do with the investment procurement process. Following the current request for proposal process in the procurement of investment-related services takes an extremely long period of time, and it doesn't allow for the flexibility that's required to timely fund new investment opportunities. As the global market continues to increase in complexity and the fund grows in size, and the global market world becomes more competitive, CalSTRS is increasingly constrained by the traditional state procurement process and procurement methods used to contract for investment-related services. Oftentimes in the hiring of an investment manager, the investment opportunity has passed by the time the RFP process has been completed and the asset manager is actually in place. Additionally, the current process may actually deter some potential bidders, especially emerging managers, due to the cost and complexity of the RFP process. In order to maximize returns and fulfill its fiduciary obligations and duties, CalSTRS needs the authority and agility to be able to solicit and contract with investment managers as the need arises. And delays in securing the desired investment services can ultimately hinder CalSTRS' ability to carry out these fiduciary decisions in the manner intended. In the past, CalSTRS has been forced to actually miss out on potentially lucrative investment opportunities because the procurement process took a year or more to complete, and these types of delays can result in significant opportunity costs. Staff have surveyed other state public pension funds from around the country and have noted that many are not required to use state-mandated procurement processes. In California, in recognition of the unique nature and requirements of certain government agencies, the legislature has actually granted exemptions from the competitive bidding requirements. The California Housing and Finance Agency and the California Health Benefits Exchange have both been granted blanket exemptions, and CalPERS is exempt from the competitive bidding requirements when contracting with health plans and long-term insurance plans. So staff is proposing that we seek legislation that will provide CalSTRS with the authority and discretion to enter into contracts and agreements for investment-related services under the board's terms and conditions in lieu of state contracting requirements. There aren't any identified program or administrative costs associated with this legislation, and there would be unknown savings as a result of reduced workload and reduced or eliminated opportunity costs that are associated with the current process. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I just have a question about have we thought about and I'm sure we have, the definition of investment-related services? We aren't talking about IT contracts or our board investment consultants, I would assume, based on more hiring managers.
It's more hiring managers
Well,
and
we want
contracts.
to go through all of our contracts that we have related to investments, but my first reaction would be, it would be investment managers. Also relationships like custodian services or ones that are probably tightly tied to the portfolio, but not, I wouldn't have said technology services. You know, that seems like a bright line test, that one that you said. But I thought we'd go through all of our contracts and kind of see the size of them and frequency of them and work with Chris and Michelle just on where this has actually created handcuffs for getting things done and where you take time to do something and it's not an issue, and create a better bright line test around it. But I guess I was picturing something broader than just the investment managers themselves.
Thank you. With that, if it's appropriate, I would move approval to the proposal.
Moved by Grant.
Second.
Second, properly seconded. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that passed. Thank you. So I do have an information request or an issue that, oh, Dana, you want to jump in?
I just had a comment or a question, that's kind of both, on one of the bills out of the legislative summary from,
Go ahead.
so how did the CFO and CEO get in a flood hazard planning bill? How did, it was like,
A flood hazard.
the
That's not how we
CFO and the
learned it in
CEO, how did the two of those find themselves in the same bill? Was it somebody's spot bill that we jumped on, or they took our bill?
We put the bill on an active file, and then when it was clear we weren't going to move the bill, it was appropriated and gutted and amended.
But they didn't get ours out of it?
No, they took our provisions out.
Oh, okay.
We just want to bring it to your attention because it was a bill that you were sponsoring and therefore following. We wanted to show you the final disposition of the bill.
Got it, okay, I just
Yeah, it's a good one.
found that pretty strange.
It's all about risk, flood hazard, CFO,
There you go,
COO.
that's it.
Sure is.
There's a tie there somehow. Thanks, Ed, thanks,
So-
Mary Ann.
I'd like to request information come back to the board on this, the issue of credible compensation. Triggered a thought in the, our new member service centers that are around the state, and the need for us to be able to get something done, one and done, and the importance of getting correct information in, so the correct information is going out. Is there an opportunity for us to expand any educational opportunities that we currently provide for school districts? I'm thinking more financial, people who are responsible for reporting CalSTRS information, and other educational leaders in communities, to be able to come to the regional resource centers and receive a training or a course on a specific topic that is critically important in terms of getting information, and they can be provided quarterly, almost like in an academy. I think as one of the stakeholders calls it the CalSTRS College, but we can call it an academy. But the conversations about credible comp, what is credible comp, and I know we do a lot of information, but would there be a demand if we properly advertised regionally for an opportunity for folks to come forward and get the information in one meeting, get questions answered? I don't expect an answer now, but this year it would be great to get some feedback as to whether or not that's doable and why it would be doable, and if it's not, why not? Okay.
Absolutely.
I see, Maggie. Okay.
Had to chime in here. Maggie Ellis, Chair of CTA Retirement Committee. As we're moving forward at negotiations tables, the credible comp and understanding the two now tiers that we have within our districts and within our bargaining tables of 2% at 60 and 2% at 62, what's credible to DB, what's credible to DBS, what goes nowhere. Having education for everyone, whether it's our payroll departments, our negotiating chairs, our district negotiating departments, locals, that information I think has to be readily available for everyone so that we're not making those errors in our contracts that then come back to CalSTRS and say, hey, nope, you got a little word in here, it's not going to go anywhere. And it's frustrating. And I know I've had great conversations with Peter and with Ed, who are very helpful, but that's me and that's up here, and I have that personal connection. And when we're talking about all of the districts throughout the state and all the locals, as we're trying to make sure that we're abiding by the rules, the key thing is that communication that we have and that training we have, and being able to say to you what kind of language works and what kind of language doesn't work. And we don't want you to get in our negotiations. I know there's a limit there, but it's just understanding how do we try and minimize the differences we have between our two tiers that we now have in our districts, because nobody wants to negotiate a benefit that only goes for the 60s and doesn't go for the 62s. So I really encourage a lot of discussion on this and look forward to having a bigger plan of how can we all get educated and not create problems.
Thanks, Maggie. So it's 10 after 3. We've been sitting for almost 2 hours came back from lunch. Pleasure of the board. Do we continue now, or do we take a 10-minute break? Or do people just want to take breaks as needed?
No, I'm like,
Breaks as needed?
I'm cool. Let's just go.
We got a ways to go, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, right. It's just,
No
I don't know,
offense
it's
to
just,
financial
maybe it's me,
statements. I'll
it's
get a
very difficult to stay totally engaged and focused for me, it's about 90 minutes to 2 hours, and so, we'll continue, and people will take breaks as needed, but it's something for us to think about going forward in terms of a rhythm of our meetings. Maybe we want to build in 10, 15-minute breaks every hour and a half or 2 hours, and see how we feel about that, okay? So we'll continue, and people just take breaks as you need them. Very good. So, can we bring the actuaries back right about now? Serve some chocolate chip cookies, and we'll all be asleep. Okay.